Oh, hello. Today we are wrapping up my reading in October, which was a very high volume month, and we'll talk about how that happened and why. It's been a really hard month for me, though I think I'm on the upswing, emotionally processing some things. Basically, if you are a watcher of this channel, you know that this year has been very difficult for me health-wise, and I did finally get a diagnosis this month of exactly what the actual underlying issues I have going on are, which basically is a chronic autoimmune disease that I don't want to have, but I am thankful that I finally have a diagnosis, that I have an explanation of not just this year, but a lot of things in my life in terms of my health that make more sense. And I actually also happen to live next to one of the only kind of like dedicated treatment places in the country for this condition, so I definitely have access to great care. But yeah, it's scary. It's something I'm gonna have to live with forever, and it also makes me immunocompromised, and even more so as I start treatment. So living in a plague with that is real exciting to think about the prospect of that. So with all that going on, I have definitely been in big like comfort reading mode this month. So I have read so much. I've read a lot of books, and I've read a lot of things that surprised me. Like, I feel like this was a very surprising reading month, and not that many things that I hated. A lot of things that kind of took me by surprise, and then a lot of things that I really enjoyed. So we'll get into some stats, and then we will talk about my disappointments, my surprises, and my hits for the month of October reading wise. I read 35 books this month. I read 35 books this month, and actually I'm filming this on the last day of October, so I'm probably gonna read one or two more. I read 35 books this month for a total of 9,056 pages with an average book length, here's the key, of 258, because a lot of what I was reading, as we will talk about in a minute, were short things from Ruby Dixon. The average age of book that I read was 7 years old, and the amount of time that it had been on my TBR was 6 months, so reading newer things, but they are things that I'm getting through pretty quickly relative to how long I've had them. I paid for only 9 of the 35 books I read for an average cost of those books of $1.97. In terms of genre, 19 of the books I read were what I would call speculative romance, and that is because this month, when I tell you that I have been in the Ruby Dixon binge deep dive, like that is what I have been doing. I have blazed through her Corsairs series, and then I was like, you know what? I've kind of dipped into Ice Home from her, but I've never actually read one of the original Ice Planet Barbarians, and I'd gotten the original one for free at some point, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna try this. We'll get into why I was trepidatious, but I'll try it. And I am now on book, I think I've read like 8 or 9 in that. I've gone back and started at the beginning of Ice Home. It's like a whole thing. So I read 19 speculative books this month, and then just kind of a normal mix for me beyond that. So a little contemporary and historical romance, fantasy, sci-fi, short stories, historical fiction, general nonfiction, mystery if I didn't say that. All of those things also were in there. So I read a lot this month. Rating wise, my average rating was 3.4, so pretty good, and a pretty, you know, bell curve type distribution between 2.5 stars and 4.5 stars. That was sort of the range. So yeah, I read a lot, and we'll talk about some of those things. And then in terms of challenges, well, I decided once I've gone on this binge, I have decided I'm gonna vlog that Ice Planet reading experience, because I actually have a lot to say about it, and I'll talk a little bit about it in this video, but I want to give a whole video to it. So I did that. I finished all of the remaining arcs that I had to get to for this year. Yay. And I've actually already started on my 2021 arcs. So that was good. And then I also finished up Operation Sci-Fi, not quite as I had planned, but just as I mentioned at the top, health things have come up, and I've just been trying to get much crisper with myself on doing what I need to do for me for the rest of this year, because it's been a hard year already, and it's gonna get a little worse before it gets better. So I just decided to end that there. So that vlog is up. Did I do anything else for challenges? I don't think so. I will tell you guys, normally I cut off my reading for the year in terms of what I count for my end of the year list in mid-December. I have made the decision that I'm gonna cut that off at the end of November, because just in terms of like the stress level of doing all of the videos I like to do for end of the year wrap-ups and the timing, I think that that will work out better. So I'm gonna have one more month of reading that will count for this year's list. So I made that decision in terms of sort of challenge related things. And then anything else on challenges I did this month? Oh, I did finish up enough of my 5-star predictions that I'm gonna do a conclusion of my last batch of 5-star predictions, and then I film more. So you'll be seeing that in a couple weeks. So yeah, I think that that's it for challenges for me for now, I think. So with that being said, let's just get into disappointments first, because I only had one I wanted to talk about. And I actually already mentioned it in my mid-month check-in, so I probably don't need to say a ton about that here, but The Awakening by Nora Roberts definitely was the most disappointing book I read this month. I would say the reason it was so disappointing is not because I had a terrible time in it. Like, I gave it 2.5 stars because, like, I just love the way Nora Roberts tells a story. I get lost in it. I get swept up in it. I rarely, like, regret time I spend in a Nora Roberts or J.D. Robb book. It's not a question of that. It's more that this book is the beginning of a trilogy, and it really is just like a 500-page prologue. Like, so little happens apart from like setting up the world. I don't know. It was just a bummer. And I mentioned this and I had a few people say like, yes, I feel this way too, both on here and on Goodreads, which is I think that she's not getting the editing she needs these days. Like, I think she needs somebody to edit her a little bit more aggressively. And it hurts my heart to say that because, like I said, it's not that I'm mad when I'm in one of her books. It's not like I'm having a bad time, but in terms of like taking her stuff from good to great, I do feel like her standalone thrillers, and then in this book as well, there just needs to be some editing to actually give it more structure to make the book as a whole work better. Or in this case, I'm gonna say probably the overall trilogy work better, because it's an intriguing setup to a trilogy for sure. Like, I wouldn't steer someone away from giving it a try necessarily, but the individual book is hard for me to recommend because the individual book is just not very substantive. I don't know. It was just a bummer. So it was disappointing. Like, that's why I always say it's like disappointments and not like the worst, because yeah, it has some redeeming qualities. It just wasn't quite as good as I was hoping. So then we can just go ahead and move into surprises, I guess. So we'll start with The Sherwood Ring, I guess, by Elizabeth Marie Pope. So I read this because one of my very best friends, Jolene, and I were reminiscing about Elizabeth Marie Pope. We both absolutely loved The Perilous Guard when we were growing up. Like, that was a shared book that we both loved. And I thought that I had never read The Sherwood Ring, but I remembered one of the twists as I was reading it. So I must have read it, but I just had totally forgotten it. And this is just such a quirky, weird ass book. It is. So we did a whole live stream book club on it. So if you want to see like our full breakdown and like giggle session about what a weird book this is, you can go watch that. But this book is basically interconnected stories with a framing device set in the 1950s, but all of the main action taking place in the Revolutionary War, so like in the 1770s. There's ghosts, there's family, ancestral home stuff. It's very ooky spooky feeling. Like, I feel like this has a lot of atmosphere that is fun. So I think that this is a great time of year to read this book. And if you're looking for like kind of nostalgic YA, I definitely recommend this. I gave this 3.5 stars and actually I had a really good time reading this. It's just such a quirky, weird book that I just don't think would get written today. And that makes me just sort of love it. So anyway, this was definitely a surprise. It wasn't what I was expecting. It was a surprise that I remembered while reading it that I must have read it at some point. So it was definitionally a surprise. But yeah, this was fun. I'm glad that we read that, and I appreciate Jolene humoring me and coming on and doing book club with me. I had a very good time doing that. Then I thought we could talk about Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. So I did get to this, and I will tell you, if you were looking for a good Halloween read, like I know you guys are seeing this on the 1st of November, I guess we'll technically be out of ooky spooky season, but if you're still in that mood, this was such a good kind of haunted house light type of a book. This isn't like full on scary, I don't think. I think that this has a really nice balance of a little bit of like jump scare, a lot of creepiness to it. It's creepy. That's a good word for this. This book has a lot of creepiness to it without getting into full on like really scary. It is a haunted house story, and it's got a dual timeline, which you know sometimes can be hit or miss if you watch this channel. I don't always love that in a book. In this case, I actually felt like it worked pretty well. So the past timeline is sort of like an Amityville horror type book. So you're reading a book within a book in the past timeline, and it's describing a haunted house that this family moves into, and they can only stay 20 days, and then after that they basically like flee, never to return. And then in the present timeline, the daughter, so there's a mom, dad, and a daughter. The daughter has inherited the house and is going back to get it ready to sell, and she is trying to figure out if what they saw ever actually happened. Like, she thinks that it never really happened and her dad was just like lying to make money, but then she starts thinking maybe it did happen or maybe something happened. And I really, all of the plot stuff in this I liked, all of the character stuff in this I liked, and while I wouldn't call it like the most like twisty turny shocking surprises, like I think you could kind of see the direction things were going. I felt like all of it was well paced and unfolded nicely. The thing that kept this from being higher rated for me though, and this is what surprised me because I'd seen very mixed reviews on this, I really liked most of what was happening in this book. The part that did not work for me was the writing. Like, that was the part, and I've read 2 books, I think. 1 or 2 books from Riley Sager before, and I don't remember this being as much of a problem. The actual quality of the sentences in this really threw me off, particularly in the book within a book. It kept like, the sentence structures itself would like take me out of the story. Like, I would sit there and be like, what? Like, how, just something about the flow of, I can't even put my finger on it. It just kept disrupting my reading. So I couldn't give this higher than a 3.5 because that was just like a weird experience that surprised me. But I think that this was fun. I had a really good time reading this. It's not like the most thrilling thing you're ever gonna read, but if you're looking for a good Halloween book, I think that this 100% fits the bill. So for me, it hit the spot of what I was looking for. Then, another surprise I wanted to mention that I really liked was The Bright and Breaking Sea by Chloe Neal. I gave this 4 stars, and it is the beginning of a new fantasy trilogy or series that it surprised me because I wasn't sure if it was fantasy with a strong romantic element or if it was a fantasy romance. And I will tell you that I do think it ends up being more of a fantasy with a strong romantic element in it, which surprised me in a good way because actually that's often what I really enjoy. Like, unless I'm wanting, like, if I'm in the mood for a full-on fantasy romance, obviously I'll pull for that. But something I tend to really like in fantasy is a romance subplot thrown in. That tends to kind of make the overall book often work a little bit better for me than it might otherwise. And that was definitely the case here. And I just really thought that this was a fun fantasy world setup. So it's basically like ye fantasy version of the Napoleonic Wars in a slightly different world than ours, like, but with pretty clear 1-to-1 matches for like England and France. And it has magic, obviously, because it's the fantasy version of it. And it's called aligning. And it's like you can align with these different elements. And our protagonist is a lady captain, like a lady sea captain, who has this alignment to the sea. So like that's where her magic is. She came from this like home for foundlings. So she's sort of like a grown-up orphan. She's working in Her Majesty's spy network, but people don't necessarily know exactly what her position is because it's very hush-hush. And she and this aristocratic, kind of very fuddy-duddy colonel get assigned to go on a mission to rescue somebody from behind enemy lines, basically like a spy who's been abducted by the kind of Napoleon figures organization. And there is there's a mole within the Secret Service or the spy network. Who is it? And I literally, as soon as that character came on page, was like, oh, this person's a bad guy, flipped to the end and was like, yep, this person's like a villain, correct. Like, I called it immediately. So it wasn't that surprising in that respect, but I was surprised mostly by the genre that it ended up being and how much I enjoyed the way it worked. This is my 2nd series I've tried from Chloe Neal, and I just really like her writing a lot. The other series I've tried is a paranormal, like vampire kind of urban fantasy type series, and that I've enjoyed. And this I'm also really into, and I think that this will be a real crowd pleaser for people who are looking for sort of a lighter version of fantasy. I really enjoyed this, and I would definitely recommend it, and it just surprised me how much it just really worked for me, and I'm excited to continue in the series. So that one was really good. I gave that 4 stars. And then let's just do like a whole Ruby Dixon moment. So Ruby Dixon is the pen name for another author a mainstream romance author who publishes in traditional publishing, who nobody is totally sure who it is. I have surmised from some of the word usage in the earlier books in this series that she must be a part of the Commonwealth because of some of the slang she uses. So she is not an American or a Canadian, I don't think. I'm like, it's now like my mission in life to figure out who this is. Like, I really want to do some investigation and figure out who this is because I want to read the rest of what she writes because I love what she does. But anyway, Ruby Dixon is the pen name she uses to write what are ostensibly and sometimes very campy sci-fi romances. The thing that makes these books really fantastic, in my opinion, and the two that I like the best of this month, I would say, the three, I guess, were Enticed by the Corsair, Ice Planet Barbarians original, which very much surprised me for a reason I'll tell you here in a minute, and Lauren's Barbarian. I gave all of those 4 stars and I really enjoyed all of those. But the thing that makes Ruby Dixon so special is that, yes, she has these very campy premises for her sci-fi romance novels. In the Corsairs, it's space pirates with human women who in the Ruby Dixon universe are basically like contraband, like humans are abducted from Earth and are sold into either sort of like slavery as a pet or sexual slavery. Like those are really their two lots in life if they leave Earth and go into the rest of the universe. So in the Corsair series, it's space pirates who have like are basically like freeing these human slaves as they kind of go along, and they are falling in love. She has a race that is pretty consistent across her different books that are Messica, I guess is how you say it. They have like different variants depending on the series, and they are these gigantic blue aliens with gigantic alien peens. Like that's a part of this. That's part of the campiness that have like it's like literally sort of like a rabbit vibrator. Like, anyway, it's a whole thing. So like they're very steamy books, like that's a part of the sort of campy, steamy, whatever. But underlying that, there's so much emotion, and like she goes there sometimes in these books that really, it always surprises me because like, as I mentioned, the setup of this where human women are completely at the mercy of this entire universe they don't even know exists until they are forcibly abducted and put into this awful scenario. There's like some real shit kind of underlying that, like, and some of this kind of sci-fi romance treats that a little lighter, like it's mentioned but it doesn't really go into it. And Ruby Dixon just has this way of, I think, kind of walking the line between going there and really getting into some of the implications of the world in a way that I think feels respectful to actual survivors of sexual assault, because that is often a huge part of the stories of the heroines that we're encountering. But like there's always still this sort of like underlying tongue-in-cheek humor that gets woven in, and that is something that I know does not work for everyone. It's something I very much appreciate in romance novels in particular, but in general, I really like it when authors are kind of able to have a realness to their stories but still keep the overall tone light. She is just so good at doing that. So I had avoided the Ice Planet series in particular, which is sort of the one she's most infamously known for, the Ice Planet Barbarians, where this group of women who've been abducted, basically they like get control of the ship and crash land it on this planet where this race, the blue aliens, at some point also crash landed and like have sort of evolved. They are the Ice Planet Barbarians, so they're sort of these like very primitive tribal dudes. You resonate, you were basically become like fated mates. So it's like a really campy, fun version of a fated mate trope in a sci-fi romance. I had kind of not really fully dipped into that series because in that very first book in the series, there is on the page sexual assault. The abductors of the human women take one of the human women and, you know, assault her on page. And it's frank. I wouldn't say it like lingers on it, but it is a frank description of that. And there's also the implication that other women who have been abducted, who we haven't seen, have also had this happen to them over the course of them being enslaved. And so that is just a lot. That's heavy, and that's not necessarily something I want to read about in my fun, campy sci-fi book. So like I had kind of avoided reading that original book because I knew that that was a part of it. I will tell you, while I don't love that, like it's a lot, I actually ended up being pretty impressed with how that was handled. In the book itself, the women who are assaulted or killed, some of them felt a little bit sort of like cannon fodder, but as the series goes on, you kind of circle back, and there's like a little extended sequel. They circle back and kind of like really deal with how awful what happened to those women were. And it didn't ruin the book for me in a way that I thought it would. And the reason is because in every single one of these books, the heroines just find a way to kind of make the best of a bad situation. Like that is what happens in every single one of these books. So anyway, I'm going on and on and on, and I should edit this down because I'm gonna do a full vlog because I have a lot more thoughts about this. But basically, I just have been surprised at how comforting these books have been, given that there are some like pretty grim things that happen in these books. There's something about the tone that always pulls it through. And I'm finding that these books are such a perfect encapsulation of kind of one of the literary theories about romance novels, which is that they allow women to explore agency in a society where they have traditionally had no agency and are just now gaining agency, especially over their own bodies. And I think that this kind of literalizes that theory more than I've seen in almost any other series. So I'll do a vlog and give you my full thoughts in that, but I've been surprised at how like into that series I have been this month, clearly based on the number of them that I read. Okay, shifting away from Blue Alien Peen, let's go to literary fiction. So Difficult Women by Roxane Gay. I unsurprisingly really love this. Now I gave it 4 stars. It's not my favorite of the things I've read from her, and I definitely personally prefer Aidi, which is the other short story collection I've read from her, over this one. But I will tell you, I think I put this in my Goodreads review. I'm so impressed at how Roxane Gay, both of the collections I've read from her, have managed to be so thematically consistent in a way that I find really pleasurable. Her books do such a good job of like picking theme or topic or a mood, and just the short stories all feed into it. And in both cases, the collections are so perfectly named. Aidi is an indigenous word or name for the island of Haiti, and it is her just like exploring all of these different stories related to the Haitian experience or the Haitian American experience. Like it's so, I just have no critique. I love that collection. And this is called Difficult Women, and it's exploring so many different kind of variants and nuances about what the word difficult being ascribed to a woman connotes about that woman. And I can see why some people don't love this one, because there's some hard stories in here, both in terms of just like what actually happens to the women in these stories, but also there's some unlikable women as our main characters in these stories. But I just loved it. I thought it was so well done. The 2 stories that I particularly liked, there's one called Florida that I thought was great, which has a bunch of different perspectives of women who are living or working in this gated community in Florida. I thought that was fantastic. The title story is also really good, but then there's one, I forget what it's called, but it's about, essentially it's like a take on a retelling of Jacob and Esau. It is so good. The Mark of Cain. Okay. And it's about these twins, and I don't know. I just thought the biblical allusion in it worked so well, and just the way that she brought that into the theme of this collection I thought was great. Anyway, this is just super good. Like I said, it didn't connect with me to make it like a 4.5 or a 5 star the way that Aidi did. But if you're looking for a great collection of short stories, yeah, I mean, this is absolutely wonderful. Unsurprisingly, because Roxane Gay is a queen. And then I have 2 4.5 stars to tell you guys about, and I feel like I don't know how to approach these because both of these are 2021 releases, and I love them so much, but they're so far away that I don't want to be a jerk, but I want to tell you how much I love them. So first of all, I'll just say Actor Age Eve Brown was fantastic. It's so good. It's the 3rd book in the trilogy of the Brown sisters from Talia Hibbert. I didn't love it as much as I love Take a Hint, Dani Brown. That would be very hard because that book is one of my all-time favorite romances I've ever read. But this was so charming. I had some plot issues with it in terms of the transition of the main couple moving from being platonic to romantic. I thought that didn't totally work for me. But in terms of like the characters and the writing, it is so stinking charming, delightful. It made me laugh out loud. It just put a smile on my face start to finish. And that is a trilogy that is winding up very strongly. Again, Talia Hibbert, what a queen. I love her. So that comes out next May. I know that that's a long time to wait, but for those of you who've been reading along in that series, you will not be disappointed. I don't think. It's really, really good. So I've been talking to the publicist already. I'm like, what do we need to do to make sure people read this book? She must think I'm a psychopath, by the way. She sent me Take a a hint, Danny Brown, and I wrote her back and I was like, I love this book so much. Hopefully she appreciates my enthusiasm. There's that one that comes out in May. One that comes out sooner than that, it's not as egregious, I feel like, is, and my last one I'll talk about is Highland Treasure from Lindsay Sands. So Lindsay Sands is another one of my campy queens. Like she writes these very campy is the word that I'm using a lot in this video. She writes very campy, over the top vampire series, what you guys will know by the time this goes up. I'm actually going to be an Argento vampire for Halloween this year. Like I love that series. It's very campy and fun and a very different take, I feel like, on the kind of paranormal romance, urban fantasy type vampire series we see. It's a lot lighter in its tone and I like its mythology. Like I really like that series. However, I absolutely adore her Highlander series and just generally like her take on medieval Scottish historical romance in general. I really like. They're like rom-coms with a mystery. Like that's how there's always like a mystery suspense plot. And then it's very external conflict driven. There's not a lot of angst in them. It's just like dumb hot people in the Scottish locks solving a mystery. That's what these books usually are. This book, I actually think if we're talking objective quality, insofar as one can be objective about such things, this is maybe the best Lindsay Sands book I've ever read. And I have easily read 40 books from her. I thought that this was actually a very high quality book, a very high quality historical romance that is still light in its tone, but I thought the pacing was perfect. So it's sort of a road trip type story where our heroine is basically, her family gets sacked. Their familial home in England is like taken over. She is horribly abused. Her father's killed. Her mother is like near death, and her mother manages to like smuggle her out and is sending her to her relatives in Scotland. So she is like completely physically broken, but she has to go on this road trip. Our hero is the second youngest brother of this Buchanan tribe of brothers we've been following, who are all so much fun. And he is the healer. It's Rory. And I have been waiting for his book because he's one of the standout characters in the series. He is just like a lovely human being and he's like a doctor basically. So she specifically knows Rory is in the area, the mom does, so she arranges it so that the guards that are escorting the daughter are gonna grab Rory so that he can hopefully like heal her and help get her to Scotland. There's these people who are trying to get her because there's like this political intrigue thing happening, so like they're trying to stay one step ahead of that, and there's a romance. And this book just worked so well. Like I think in terms of just like the plot worked, it was perfectly paced. The characters were all great because we've already known and loved Rory, but then also our heroine, Elisande, is one of the best ones she's ever written. She's like such a great mixture of like courage, but not too stupid to live, which can sometimes happen with her heroines. So I thought that was great. This is just like this will be added to my list of like where to start with Lindsay Sands, because I think this is a really good version of what she does. It's not quite as like lighthearted or funny as some of her books sometimes are, but I still thought that it was really, really well done. And it comes out in January, so it's not that far away. And for those of you who know and love this Highlander series with the Buchanan brothers, I think you're really gonna be happy with how Rory's story unfolds, because I just thought it was great. So I gave that 4.5 stars too. I thought it was just absolutely great and one of my favorite romances I read this year. So, I've been talking a long time. Hopefully I edit that into something coherent, but I think that wraps up my October reading for the most part. Let me know if you have read any of the books I talked about, or if you're looking forward to reading any of the books I talked about, or just what you read and enjoyed in October. Let me know that in the description below. And yeah, I think that will do it for me. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, along with a link to register to vote. When you see this, we've got 2 days left before Election Day here in the US. Definitely check out the link I have below. There are some states where you can register the same day, so even if you haven't registered yet, you may still be able to vote. And just if you have not voted and you're registered, please, please, please vote. Make a plan, get some snacks, pee before you go, be ready to stand there, make your voice heard, get your right to complain, because if you don't vote, you don't get to complain. That's the bottom line. So I will see you guys at the polls. Actually, I've already been, but I will be cheering you on as you go to the polls. Hope you had a wonderful October, and I will just talk to you guys soon. Bye.